Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Bathrobe Chat. This is where I, Steve the Missionary, wear my bathrobe and I chat about things that happened this week or things that interest me. Remember, all of my Steve the Missionary videos are filmed ahead of time, so it's very difficult for me to comment immediately about things like what happened that week, what's happening politically, culturally, online wise, and everything like that. So I like to come on here once a week, every Monday at 3 p.m. Pacific time, and get to talk. And today, the main topic of the whole conversation is going to be Rent Live, but mostly because I was a theater kid in high school. And we're gonna get into that first. So, I hope you guys saw Rent Live. Otherwise, you're gonna learn a lot, but I don't know if you're gonna understand a lot. So let's get right to it. And recently for TV channels to show live versions of musicals that they kind of restage and put a popular or famous cast on. And so the most recent before this was, I think, Jesus Christ Superstar, which was pretty good. And then now they're doing Rent, or they just did Rent. And it was kind of funny how few like truly famous people were in this cast. That was probably for a lot of reasons. The first of which is that everyone's supposed to be like 20 years old in this cast, but but Vanessa Hudgens and Miguel were like the names, and they both showed up really good. They both did a dang good job, but poor Miguel got hardly anything to sing because I don't know. Because Benny is not a really good part. So that's really unfortunate for him. But let's go by point what I got. I keep on looking at this side. I have all of my points written here on a blue board. You'll see that Rent is most of the show today. So number one, what did we learn from Rent? Well, number one thing we learned from Rent is always go 100% when you're a performer, even at the dress rehearsal, because you never know what's going to happen. You never know what's actually going to be shown. You never know. You want to do something that the audience will appreciate. The Rent had to show, for the most part, their dress rehearsal last night, and then only the last scene was shown truly live because someone broke their leg. And it's really obvious that some people were not going 100%. First of all, it was Roger. Well, I don't know. I thought he wasn't going 100%. But then they got to the last scene in the show, and you realize, no, he's just that bad of a singer. So there's that. First off, hi, Rebecca. We will absolutely pray for your mom's family, especially your grandpa, because your great aunt died. So please, everyone, pray for Rebecca and her family. And back to Rent. Yeah, go 100% on your rehearsal. Don't go halfway. The people who clearly weren't going halfway. There was Vanessa Hudgens. She was playing oh my gosh, Maureen. And then there was Kiersey Clemens, who I'd never heard of before. She played Joanne, and she like nailed this like broad, powerful gospel voice with really good jokes. She absolutely nailed it. And then of course Brandon Victor Dixon, who like can do no wrong. So those were the people that were going 100%. And the people that weren't were most of the guys. Mark got better and better as the night progressed, but most of the guys, and Angel was not very good. I think they just picked someone who was a big deal among people who know things about drag queens and then hope that the celebrity would go. But like, if you can't hit the notes for Angel, which is not by any means the hardest part in the show, don't be in the show. Yikes. So yeah, Angel and Roger and some of the extras were not good. And that's just the way it is. But dang, Vanessa Hudgens showed up. And one thing I really noticed about the directing of the piece, especially in the first act, it was not directed, especially on the TV end, on like where the cameras were and what the camera angles were, who was being shown at what time. This production was not staged for story. It was not directed or produced to emphasize the story. It took a little while, like because I knew ahead of time what people's characters and characterization and what they wanted out of every scene. Because I'm such a fan of the show, I could fill in the blanks, but there were a lot of blanks. And even when they changed the script for the sake of television, and they left some of the blanks even bigger than before, and Rent does not have a perfect script. Like, if you're going to change it, improve it. Don't make it harder to follow. That was strange. That was super strange. Everyone remember that there's a chat in the corner if you want to add your voice to what we're talking about. Today it's mostly Rent and a couple other things from my own parish. Please, you're welcome, even just to say hi. So yeah, direct for story. Find the best part about the directing for story was actually when Angel died, and then the funeral, and then the reprise of I'll Cover You. So there was Contact, which is sexy just for the sake of being sexy. But then there was the death of Angel, which when you see it on stage, he just sort of stands there and says, take me, and then there's a bright light behind. And it's okay. You just happen to realize that Angel is dead by the end of that song. But in the staging, there was this bright light from below and above and behind, and there was this sort of like heavenly thing that happened to kind of show this passage, and that really punched in a totally different way, and in the fact that that Collins like carried Angel into that. It's really cool, this sort of carrying in that doesn't happen on stage. And so from moving from that point, and then there was a commercial break, and then to the funeral, which on stage is as wide as the whole stage facing the audience, but on TV it was just in this tiny room, and just for the sake of the people there, showing a couple things about like what it meant to live and die with AIDS, to live and mourn people who had AIDS, and then it really affected Brandon Victor Dixon's performance. His performance was not, for the most part, was not a ground shaking, to the rafters gospel song. It was shaky and intimate, but with all the skill in the world. He knew exactly what he was doing, and it was very like precise, and I loved it. He nailed it. It wasn't overwhelming, but it shook your foundation. Awesome work, awesome job. And that was a response to the way it was directed. That was a response to what the set was, what the setting was. That is how you direct for story. And so few times these live musicals direct for story. But when it happens, it's really, really cool. And this is why I like Broadway shows, because you can tell a story in a specific, unique, and emotional way, as we saw with I'll Cover You. I'm looking over here. Yeah, but then one last thing, I was not that impressed with Mimi. Mimi's part is hard. It's a weird balance. It might be a weakness in the script. It's a weird balance you gotta strike in order to be Mimi. Mimi's is famously, like, the original Broadway Mimi doesn't have a good voice. Everyone knows that. That's just the way it is. But the part where Mimi works in the original cast is Goodbye Love. Goodbye Love, goodbye love. You're listening to it, and the whole show, she has this raspy, grating voice, and you enjoy not listening to her. But then she comes into Goodbye Love, and you realize how much she is actually throwing away, or how much she's actually giving up, or is being taken from her. And it is a combination of all those things. And so she's saying goodbye to the person she loves, specifically Roger, but she's also saying goodbye to the concept of love in her life. There's this total despondency that's happening in the song, and she is trying to tell you, the audience, that it's happening with her, and that she's sinking further and further into it during the chorus of that song. It's happening. And in the original Broadway cast, you can hear that desperation and desolation and depression and sadness and angst. And in this cast, not so much, which was very unfortunate, because otherwise you're just repeating the song Goodbye Love over and over and over and over and over again. And then she ends up sleeping on a bench at the end of the song. And you have to realize she is in a place where her life, where her love, her health, her friends are all cut off from her from a combination of drama and drugs. And that's an awful place to be, and you need to act like it. So on the whole, Rent was a 7 out of 10. Could have been better. I've seen much worse. So that was the specific drama of last night and how good the performance and the directing was. So let's talk a little bit more about like the broader ideas of Rent, which are fun, I guess. So the first off, Rent has become, I think it won a Pulitzer Prize. It won like all the Tonys ever, and a couple other things, and like the GLAAD Awards and stuff. Rent has become kind of the flagship piece of art for the AIDS, I guess, generation, or the AIDS event in a very specific moment in our history, and it's a particularly American moment. It kind of exhibits all of the fissures within us as America, and and it explains a lot of the a lot of the reactions and a lot of the motivations of a particular corner of progressive America and why they fight so hard. And one of the reasons they fight so hard is there were a lot of conservatives who just looked the other way while a lot of people died. And it's kind of hard to get past that. And so Rent has become this elevated piece to educate, to remember and memorialize a whole lot of things. The problem is Rent is only okay. Like, I like it because I listened to it when I was a teenager, and you're never going to fully reject the music you listened to when you were a teenager. And I think there's a lot of people out there who are kind of in the same boat. But it's not that good on the whole. It shouldn't it's good enough to represent the things people say it does, but it's not good enough to be the thing. And I think that it's a real disservice to that moment in American history that Rent has become the piece of art that represents the thing, the event of the AIDS crisis. And there's like a documentary or two outside of that, and then there's like Philadelphia, the movie, and then that's kind of like the big names in art representing the AIDS crisis. Another one, I guess, is there's like a AIDS remembrance chapel in the Episcopal Cathedral in San Francisco, which is absolutely beautiful. If you go to San Francisco, check out the Episcopal Cathedral, which is actually very pretty. It's prettier than the Catholic Cathedral there. And then check out off to the right is the AIDS Memorial Chapel. And I forget the artist's name, but he has the kind of lumpy sort of people that was very 90s, and he made an entire piece of kind of like an icon, but of religious iconography in his style combined with the story, as it were, of people suffering from AIDS specifically. And it's very, very powerful, very 90s, very beautiful piece of art that kind of makes you remember what happened in the 90s. And I try to remind people who did not like Father Martin, Father James Martin's book To Build a Bridge, which I reviewed and wasn't a huge fan of, but they don't like a couple of the angles he comes from. And I remind them, you have to remember, a good chunk of the people he's ministering to are people who are over 50 or over 40, and they remember very specifically the AIDS crisis and the mainstream Christian response to the AIDS crisis. And Father James Martin is trying to, how do I say it? He is trying to kind of mend those wounds and rebuild those bridges to get back. So you have to recognize what he's doing in a lot of ways. And when you realize how much work he has to get done, a lot more of what he does in the particular starts to make sense. And a lot of that is just as easy as going back and remembering, maybe watching something like Rent or like the documentaries about the AIDS crisis and be like, oh yeah, that's what people were going through. It's really it's really remarkable what was happening. And then, of course, I'm a little bit of an opera nut, so I have to mention Rent is an adaptation, just like a comic book movie is an adaptation of a comic book. Rent the musical is an adaptation of La Boheme the opera. It's really obvious, especially in the first act, how there are lines directly pulled from the opera. Most of the characters, especially the on and off relationship of Joanne and Maureen, and the on and off relationship of Roger and Mimi, the names Roger and Mimi are pulled, and Mark are directly pulled from the opera. And I love that opera. It's really cool. If you can find it, Baz Luhrmann directed a staging of it. He's the guy that did like Moulin Rouge and stuff. And it's really, really cool. One thing I like about it is that the characters are actually less mean in general. They're more fun. They actually do their art during the course of the play, and it's the sicknesses, tuberculosis instead of AIDS, and just general poverty. There was a real thing about just poverty and what it is to be poor in that opera, and not so much the musical, because there's actually a little bit of a critique of the proclaimed poor artist who couldn't actually help their poor neighbor. And I think that too many people are watching Rent without at least tipping their hat to La Boheme. I would love to see a production of Rent in the style of and time period of La Boheme, and I would love to see it the other way around. But that's just me. I don't know if anyone's going to actually try to pull that off. The Pacific Opera Company in LA just did a production of La Boheme called The Hipsters, just because like the reputation of Bohemian French people back in the day was kind of very similar to the reputation of that the hipsters had in the early 2000s. Just these deadbeats who like want to move to Prague because it's so cool, and like got high or drunk all the time and are useless but tell people that they are artists. And so they staged it so that everybody looked like hipsters and had like ironic t-shirts and stuff like that, but the love story is still the same. And I missed it because I'm an idiot, but I would love to have watched The Hipsters by the Pacific Opera Company. If you're on the West Coast, check out the Pacific Opera Company. They do cool stuff. So the real question, and I got a lot less flack from this than I anticipated, honestly, was why do Catholics watch these things? Why spend the time to watch Rent when it's full of outright rejections of religion, when it's full of ideas, outright declarations, and mockeries that go against the faith and against the morals, that are a result of the faith. And there's a couple reasons. So the first one I'm just going to say is nostalgia, straight up. This is not a good enough reason to override what I just mentioned, but it is a reason. First heard Rent when I was like 16. I was a theater kid, like very much. I was an annoying theater kid, and and it really takes me back to a very specific moment in my life and the people who I loved back then, and the people, some of whom are around and are very dear to me today. And I cannot deny that it is a part of me. It is full of nostalgia, so I will not get away from that. And the second is just honesty. There, people in the early 90s had AIDS, um, and had orgies and protested, and had weird protest art displays and all of the things, and did heroin and were addicted and not addicted, just like today. And if all of our fiction is pure, as it were, if all of our fiction involves someone doing something bad and then getting punished for a bad thing, and so that everything's right in the world, we are being dishonest. Whitewashed stories are useless if they are our only stories. They can't all be morality plays. And I'm going to repeat that a little bit later. But that the first is just honesty. Don't let your fiction be dishonest. And the second is kind of letting people tell their story. I have no idea what it means to be um, poor, ostracized, and sick because, like Angel, because I'm queer and I have AIDS. I don't know what that feels like. I never will. So I need someone, either Angel herself or Angel adjacent, like Jonathan Larson, to tell that story to me. Otherwise, I'm just guessing. And this is, one reason we read fiction by people who are not you. That's why there's a lot of people, at least I know, who are like, read fiction by women, read fiction by people of color, that sort of thing. And as someone from a conservative background, that gets annoying as kind of a rallying cry, but it's true. You can't, you will never effectively guess at someone else's story. And it takes way too much energy to do that anyway. So let them tell you that we have to admit that it is a trash musical. Remember, Jonathan Larson died the night before previews, the night before the first workshop performance. So a musical that normally gets workshopped and tweaked and changed, and good songs replace bad songs, that whole process didn't happen. It is a rough draft of a musical, and thus has a lot of problems with it. And then, two, it's created by people who have a completely different moral and metaphysical outlook than I do. So I'm going to find plenty of problems with it, but it's still worthwhile as a story told by someone who is very different than me, in an honest way, and a story that I could never guess at properly. So that's good. And then on top of that is the sympathy and the empathy that it involves. I can never truly befriend or love, and then in the long run evangelize someone who I don't sympathize or empathize with. It involves one of those two at least. And so I have to hear this. I have to know this. Even the parts that are gruff to me or insulting to me. And then again, just as a reminder, as a repeating, fiction is not a morality play. And morality plays have their place. Fiction should not get rid of or abandon reality plays, because sometimes we need a little bit more of that. Like, these are good actions that get rewarded in the end, and these are bad actions that get punished at the end. But there always has been, I think, more more involved in fiction. Just look at things like the explicitly fictional parts of the Bible, like Tobit and like Jonah and I think Judith. There is definitely a good guy and a bad guy, and the good guy wins at the end. But everything in the middle is has a lot more of this going on. And then even the parts of the Bible that are lean toward more historical, the entire book of Genesis, and the book of Kings. There is a lot of good actions get rewarded and bad actions get punished, but there's plenty of good people die and bad people win, and there is plenty of good people do bad things and with mixed results. There's or your hero has multiple wives, as people love to critique Christians for. So always know that for the longest time people told stories, there has been more than one kind of fiction, more than one kind of story, and the moral tale that we desire isn't the only one. So this is why one can or even should engage in works like Rent. I don't know if I would call it like high art, partially because of all the problems that I mentioned before, of it being just a rough draft musical, or if it is high art, is it any good? Because there's plenty of high art that's just not. But it's worth engaging. It's worth talking to. It's worth singing along with. That's my entire engagement with Rent. If you have your own ideas, if you saw it, if you have opinions, please write in the chat right now, or go ahead and comment away. This is a fun conversation to have, mostly because I like talking about musicals. So go for it. We're going to go to what's been happening at my parish. My parish, St. Clair's Church, has a really cool tradition. They have a Christmas tree in the church every Advent, and then what they do is they pass out these gold stars, and they ask you to write the names of people on the front or the back, people who you know who have died over the past year. And so the tree, the only decorations on the whole tree are the stars, representing all of the faithful departed, essentially, and their lives, their memories, their good actions, their souls, um, and God working through them is the decoration for the Christmas tree. I love that so much. And then on top of that, at the end of Christmas season, they take them all down and they put them in a basket, and they ask you, please, um, uh, I'm reading Joe. Joe, yes, you should totally listen to Rent because it's fun. So I'm kind of baffled because I'm friends with Joe. I'm baffled that you have never heard it thus far. It's a little different than what you're used to, but you and your wife should totally listen to Rent. Sorry. Back to the stars, the golden stars. At the end of Christmas, they take them down and they put them all in a basket, and they ask you to come up and grab one, even if you didn't put names up this year, like me. Um, and if you and grab one and keep it all year and pray for the people on the star. So I have one, two, three, four people who I need to pray for. I pray for their souls, pray for them, pray for the salvation of their souls, pray for the comfort of their families, and I pray for it all year. And this is all after they have lived their life in the faith, and after they have decorated my tree, the tree of my parish. So all of that combined makes for this really great back and forth between me, the departed, and the whole communion of saints, and all three of those kind of parties together interacting in this one little piece of cardboard that I'm gonna throw away by next Christmas because there's more people to pray for. I think it's wonderful. It's not exactly a long-standing tradition in the church or anything. You're not going to find like, oh well, Saint so and so in Germany in the year 470. No, it's a fairly new idea, but I love it, and I hope that more and more churches do it. It's beautiful. So if that's not happening in your church and no one knows how to decorate their trees, suggest the golden star idea. Last but not least, I want to mention, what do I want to mention? Thank you for voting on if you guys wanted stuff or if you guys wanted access to for the Patreon account. I guess voting is still open because I haven't rebuilt the Patreon page yet, but so far the voting has not been entirely one-sided, but definitely leans towards stuff. So I'm going to be coming up with t-shirt ideas, sticker ideas, maybe a booklet or other things that people want to have. And my mom wants prayer, so there you go. So I'm gonna be coming up with a lot of